Well, on Saturday, when I saw this sign at a No Kings protest, I really wished David Pawlowski could see that. David Pawlowski was the smartest person I have ever known about economic policy, and he did not like Donald Trump. Donald Trump was right about that. Smart people don't like him. When I was the chief of staff of the Senate Finance Committee, I had the honor of hiring David Pawlowski as the committee's chief economist. He was also our only economist. I told him I couldn't pay him what he was worth in the Senate staff salary structure, but I could give him the fanciest title I could think of for that job. David was born a year before Bernie Sanders in the same Brooklyn neighborhood and earned his PhD in economics at MIT. The chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and I both loved David Pawlowski as a friend and as a teacher. There was just nothing better than having our very own economist at our side all the time, ready to make us sound smarter. And David was everything that Donald Trump hates. David Pawlowski was a dedicated public servant in every sense who never tried to get rich and tried to make his country and his community a better place every day of his life. And on October 8th of last year, David emailed me saying, on October 18th, No King's Day, I will be protesting in a march in Lexington, Massachusetts. I was told that we could not march on the Green, even though that is where the revolution started, getting rid of one king, and I thought it would be symbolic to protest there to keep another king out. And so I was intending to get arrested on the Green. Turns out a permit has been granted, so we can go on the Green. However, if there are masked ICE agents at the protest, I may still get arrested. I told my 85-year-old dear friend to make sure he had a lawyer's phone number in his pocket. And a month later, I got an email from David reporting, so never did get arrested at No King's Day in Lexington for two reasons. One, no ICE agents, and two, I never made it because as I was walking from parking lot to Lexington Green, I again became lightheaded and fell to the ground. Quickly recovered, but I am having a cardiac catheterization on Monday. I am constantly out of breath, etc. Have trouble walking more than 200 yards. But still, he was going to go to the No Kings protest. And 2 weeks later, I got a call from David's devoted daughter, Jill, the mother of his two grandchildren, Liam and Brooke, telling me that David was gone. And on Saturday, I felt David's presence again in every white-haired protester who left their homes to rise up against Donald Trump. I thought of everything these crusaders have lived through. They were born into World War II, and they became a part of the first successful mass protest against an American war, the Vietnam War. It took years, but their protest succeeded in ending that war years earlier than it would have ended. They saved lives with that protest. Many of them had already risked their lives in the 1960s in southern states protesting and trying to help black people register to vote. They thought they had finished protesting war after Vietnam. It was hard to believe that mistakes like that could ever be made again, but in the 21st century, they came out again to protest the forever wars started by Republican President George W. Bush in Iraq and Afghanistan. And when each era of protest was over for them, they had a right to think that they had attended their last protest. They had a right to think that America was going in the right direction. They had a right to think that their only obligation now was to vote. They earned that. But then came Donald Trump. And on Saturday, Americans of all ages, from children to people in their 90s, came out to protest something America has never protested before. They were protesting a person. That had never happened before. Plenty of Vietnam War protesters hated Richard Nixon, but they were not actually protesting Richard Nixon. They were protesting his war. If Richard Nixon had ended the Vietnam War, the protests would have stopped. But the No Kings protest is a protest against Donald Trump. The No Kings protest movement started before Donald Trump started his war in Iran. And on Saturday, Donald Trump's war in Iran was only part of what people were protesting. If Donald Trump had ended his war in Iran the week before, all of the same people still would have turned out for the No Kings protest. They were protesting Donald Trump himself, the first person in American history to earn a nationwide protest against him. And that protest actually became worldwide on Saturday. And once again, Donald Trump, as an object of protest himself, set a record for the biggest mass protest in American history. If you're 25 years old and healthy and you couldn't get to a No Kings protest on Saturday because you were working or because you didn't know where the closest one was, David Potoff would say that's okay, but just make sure you vote in November. That was one of the points of the No Kings protests, to make sure people vote in November. But if you're 25 years old or 35 years old and you could have gone and thought about it, but then got attached to something on your screen and just couldn't pull yourself away and didn't go, the next time that happens, please think about David Potoff and how much he would love to be able to be there. Think about 85-year-old David Potoff being willing to get arrested if that's what it came to. Think about all the people David Potoff's age and older who were there on Saturday, people in their 80s and 90s who had to be there. That's what they felt. They felt they had to be there. For them, it feels like they don't have a choice. It feels like a duty, their duty as citizens of the United States of America. And remember that when an 85-year-old goes to a protest, they are not protesting for themselves. They are protesting for the people much younger than they are and the future that those younger people can have. And remember how long those 85-year-old protesters have been protesting for you and your future, and maybe find a way to say thank you sometime. When I saw that sign on Saturday of Donald Trump saying, "Smart people don't like me," I immediately texted our producers right there from the scene to fact check that quote. And they immediately came up with this.
Smart people don't like me.
When he's right, he's right. But now there are Trump voters who don't like him. In fact, according to the polls, there are now millions of Trump voters who have turned against Donald Trump and Donald Trump's war. Staten Island is one of the 5 boroughs of New York City, but it is a world away from the rest of New York City across New York Harbor. It is the only Republican section of New York City, the only Republican borough. Staten Island always votes Republican as reliably as Alabama. And on Saturday, Giuseppe Palazzolo took the Staten Island ferry over to Manhattan to march against the person who he says he voted for President of the United States.
Giuseppe Palazzolo.
Okay.
Here's my card.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. So, how old are you, and where are you from?
I'm from Staten Island, and I've been a MAGA supporter from the very beginning. I believed in him. I thought that he would end wars, like he said in his campaign. He said he wouldn't start wars. He said he'd bring peace to the Middle East. Now look at us. We're knee-deep in this illegal war. He hasn't found the congressional approval. Now we're further from peace and closer to catastrophe than ever before. I feel so betrayed. He went against his campaign promises in a very blatant way.
it's really interesting that you were saying you're a former MAGA supporter. Do you feel like a lot of people who were conservative and voted for Trump are switching now?
I think because of this war, we see a lot more people switching, for sure. This war is a catastrophe. It didn't go the way he wanted. He thought it'd be a regime change like Venezuela. Now we're knee-deep. We're going to send boots on the ground. We're going to lose more American lives. For what? There was no imminent attack. Joe Kent said that. Tulsi Gabbard said that. So where is he getting his information from? A foreign country? I thought we were the superpower, but we're not leading, we're following. Oh, Netanyahu. This is ridiculous. We're so angry. Like, I know a lot of former MAGA. This war is what really changed our minds about this guy. This and the Epstein files, he said he released them. And he fought every step of the way to keep them from being released because really the Trump files with Epstein mentioned. Howard Lutnick, his commerce secretary, he lied to us. He said he didn't visit Epstein's island. Now it looks like he was best friends with the guy. It's like one lie after another, and it's like the dominoes. They just keep falling on top of each other, and the house of cards falls down. And, this is what our founding fathers fought against. A tyrant king who acts without consent, without our representation, and without consequence. This isn't about right versus left. This is about truth versus deception. If you stay silent to what's happening, then you deserve what's coming to you. Because the government lies to get us into wars, will lie to get us into other things that are far more severe to us.
Awesome.
Okay?
Thank you.
The day after the No Kings protest, the first American Pope delivered a sermon in Italian about the King of Peace. And in that sermon, the Pope very clearly rebuked Donald Trump for starting his war in Iran. And the Pope rebuked the performance art religiosity of Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, who last week publicly prayed to his definition of God to help him kill people.
Let every round find its mark against the enemies of righteousness and our great nation.
And yesterday, the Pope said, this, our God, Jesus Christ, King of Peace, who rejects war, whom no one can use to justify war. He does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war, but rejects them, saying, even though you make many prayers, I will not listen. Your hands are full of blood. At St. Brendan's Elementary School in Boston, the nuns taught us that when we get sent off to war, as they were sure we would at some point, we could pray for our own safety, or we could pray for the safe return from war of someone we loved, but we could not. We could not ask the King of Peace for his help in killing people, even in war. Pete Hegseth is a member of a new religion that did not exist when I was in elementary school. It was invented in America during Pete Hegseth's lifetime. The founder of Pete Hegseth's religion identifies himself as a Christian nationalist. And so Pete Hegseth, like many before him, has found a religion of convenience, a religion that conveniently allows him to do whatever he wants to do as he moves through his 3 marriages and turns extramarital affairs into the next marriage, all while proclaiming his religious piety. And now the first defense secretary in history who believes that his job is to publicly pray for success in killing people offers those prayers that the Pope says will be ignored because he offers those prayers with hands full of blood. Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Whip of the House of Representatives, Congresswoman Katherine Clark of Massachusetts. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Were you at a No Kings rally yesterday?
I was.
Saturday, I mean?
I was at several in my district in Massachusetts. And I think David would have been proud of the turnout and what we saw. And I can tell you, I started the day in Malden. That was the first city in the country to express their independence from a king. And to be back there in what is a traditional blue-collar city with a thriving immigrant population that has been the home to waves of immigrants throughout our country's history. It's remarkable to see the energy that people still see the hope that they can have a country that reflects them and a government that prioritizes them and works for them. And as they look at Donald Trump, they are seeing a fundamental break of the three pillars of what he ran on. First, that he was going to lower costs on day one. Second, that he was going to release the Epstein files. And third, that there would be no new wars. He has absolutely betrayed that trust and our country and the presidency by violating and breaking all of those promises and putting the hardworking people of this country, who are really just trying to get a little breathing room in this economy, in harm's way. And, you know, what I hear from my district and throughout the country is that for small businesses, this time is harder than the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I did not think I'd hear restaurant owners ever saying a time was as hard as that. But between the tariffs, a lack of a workforce during fear on an immigration crackdown for people who are in this country legally, and to now $1 more they're paying a gallon for gas, it is really a betrayal of the American people by this president.
The tariffs were a slow building crisis for most consumers. It takes a while for the consumer to get hit by it, but the business owners were getting hit by it right away. And it was small business owners who went ultimately to the United States Supreme Court against the Trump tariffs. When you throw what he's done in his Iran war on top of all of that, surge in fuel prices, the basic cost of everything involves transportation. Diesel fuel, $1 higher than gasoline now.
Yeah. And this is what I'm hearing. And you're so right, Lawrence. It was small businesses that were hit first because they don't have the ability to have huge storage to buy in advance. And so some of what we're going to see around prices is still coming from the bigger outlets and retailers. But small businesses, it was that holiday business when they had to order back last spring, a year ago, at the height of these tariffs, that many of them expressed, I know I'm going to close, it's just will it be April or May or June when I have to close my doors? And these are the backbone of our main streets. It is how we keep our economy moving. And then you add on the costs of shipping and trucking, and just the cost of getting to work, which we've heard from so many TSA agents, simply not being able to afford to fill up their tank and drive to work because of the skyrocketing cost of gas. And you add that to what people are contending with housing and groceries and utility bills, and it's a recipe for disaster. And all the answers are in front of Donald Trump, and he keeps choosing to take people's health care for tax cuts for the billionaire class, to go to a war of choice without explanation, strategy, or exit plan, driving further costs up. And we are contending now with the cost of gas, but we are soon going to be contending with an even higher cost of groceries as we have a fertilizer crisis also brewing in the Strait of Hormuz. So all of this is just adding so much pressure on American families, 60% of whom we know are already having a hard time meeting the basic needs of their kids.
I wanted to show a photograph that I mentioned to Rachel that Nick Ramsey took at an upstate New York protest. Let me guess, Barron has bone spurs too. And the point of it is the sense that Donald Trump and his world are completely oblivious to what people are actually going through, whether it's the American military who he sends to war or the people who are now paying these high gas prices.
Yeah, and some of the angriest people that I've met are our veterans who know what it means to go to war, know what it means to say goodbye to your family, know the pressure that puts on the family left behind, and have lost friends. And really understand the sacrifice that this president just treats so glibly, really turning this conflict into some sort of video game These are real people. We are asking our sons and daughters to make the ultimate sacrifice if asked to. And for what? For what? The American people are owed an explanation of what we are doing there. And they're owed a government that works for them. And a president who promised to lower costs has made everything harder and more expensive. And that's where this deep sense of betrayal is coming from. But the hope for me is that we are seeing not only this massive protest on Saturday and all the No King rallies leading up to it, but what we are seeing at the ballot box, that we are seeing record numbers of people coming out and voting for people who will put their interests first. And we are seeing Donald Trump's numbers just plummet, as we are seeing in his own backyard, losing a state legislative race in a district he won by 14 points in Florida. This is what we're seeing across the country, and it is a sign that people understand what is at stake, and they are making sure that they are expressing their voice in every way they can, and will be there in November at the ballot box as well.
Congresswoman Catherine Clark, first of all, thank you very much for the report directly from Medford.
That's right.
about No Kings, and thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you. And coming up, Robert Garcia, the top Democrat in the House Oversight Committee, has found that Jeffrey Epstein's computers and hard drives may have never possibly been searched by anyone in law enforcement. He'll report to us on that when he joins us next. Our next guest, the top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, Robert Garcia, has requested testimony from 3 private investigators who removed evidence from Jeffrey Epstein's home. In a statement, Congressman Garcia says, "It's stunning that Jeffrey Epstein's computers and hard drives were in the possession of Epstein's private investigators and may never have been seen by any law enforcement agency. This information, discovered by Oversight Democrats during the deposition of Epstein's personal attorney, Darren Indyke, is critical as we continue our search for the truth. Oversight Democrats are working to access these hard drives and items and speak directly with the private investigators. We will identify every co-conspirator who shielded Epstein and hold them accountable." The Bank of America has agreed to pay survivors of Jeffrey Epstein $72.5 million to settle a federal class action lawsuit. The lawsuit alleges Bank of America helped facilitate Epstein's sex trafficking operation. According to the filing, the settlement would pay, quote, "all women who were sexually abused or trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein or by any person who is connected to or otherwise associated with Jeffrey Epstein or any Jeffrey Epstein sex trafficking venture between June 30th, 2008 and July 6th, 2019. The filing says that lawyers are, quote, "aware that there are at least 60 women who were victimized by Epstein between those dates." Bank of America says that while they deny any knowledge of Epstein's sex trafficking, quote, "this resolution allows us to put this matter behind us and provides further closure for the plaintiffs." The New York Times reports that most of the bank's involvement with Epstein, quote, "began after J.P. Morgan stopped doing business with him. By that time, his main victims were young women, many of them would-be models from Russia and Ukraine. Last week, Epstein survivors filed a class action lawsuit against the Trump Justice Department. The lawsuit says that the Trump Justice Department outed approximately 100 survivors of the convicted sexual predator, publishing their private information and identifying them to the world, even after the government acknowledged the disclosure violated the rights of the survivors and withdrew the information. Online entities like Google continuously republish it, refusing victims' pleas to take it down. The United States intentionally prioritized volume and speed of public disclosure over the safety and privacy of Epstein survivors, adopting a release now, retract later approach that made unlawful disclosures of victim personally identifiable information, not merely foreseeable, but inevitable. And joining us now is Congressman Robert Garcia of California. He's the top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee. Congressman Garcia, your reporting about the Epstein hard drives possibly never having been examined by law enforcement is yet another shocking turn here. What's your next step here?
Absolutely. Look, and this is why these depositions are so important. Now, we had heard that there were these hard drives that existed, and it's not just the hard drives in computers. It's additional documents, address books, other information, and other data. And we had heard they had existed, but weren't exactly sure who had them and if law enforcement had ever possessed them. During our interview, of course, with Mr. Indyk, who was the personal lawyer for Jeffrey Epstein, and of which we won a subpoena on, he admitted that it was Epstein's private investigators, 3 of them in particular, that had them in their possession, and that they'd actually had them this entire time. And not just that, but that to his knowledge, law enforcement, the FBI, the DOJ, no one had actually ever accessed these hard drives, which we understand contain likely video and other critical information as it relates to Epstein and his crimes. And so we just a couple days ago sent the 3 private investigators a letter making it very clear that we want access to those hard drives, to all the data, and we expect them to sit with us for an interview. We're expecting them to ideally get back to us right away.
There was a report, I remember at the time, that when a search was conducted of Epstein Island, they knew it was coming, and that there was time to remove things if that's what was going to happen. Is that possibly part of what happened here?
We think so. We know that essentially Epstein was tipped off and that he knew that the searches were actually going to happen. And so before the searches came in, he, of course, gets all of his hard drives, which, as we know, have critical information on all of his computers, and it was other additional documents that were included that were removed by these investigators. And so we expect a response from these investigators. That information is critical to our broader investigation. And once again, this idea that our government has failed these survivors. They have failed this investigation time and time again by not interviewing key people, including, by the way, this lawyer who was never interviewed by the FBI or the DOJ. And not to have these in their possession or to ask for them for decades is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing you'd go to is, well, let me see his hard drives. You just want, and if someone said, well, we don't have them, you would immediately know in your investigation there's something missing. We have to get to work on that, on finding that.
That's exactly right. And I think what you see over and over again in this investigation as we pull back the layers is just the level of either massive incompetence or what is more likely, which is the greatest political cover-up in modern history. There has never been this type of criminal cover-up at the highest levels of government, of business as it relates to the banks, to protect some of the most powerful people in this country. And if Donald Trump thinks he is going to divert our attention or throw out diversions to us so that we're not stuck on this investigation, he needs to understand that we're going to keep going every single day till we get justice for the survivors.
Well, we've said from the start that Donald Trump's war in Iran will not stop the news coverage of the Epstein files, and you are proving that once again. Congressman Robert Garcia, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And coming up, a Trump-supporting sheriff in California has seized ballots from last year's election in his county. California Attorney General Rob Bonta joins us next. Today, Immigration and Customs Enforcement announced that another person has died or been killed while detained by ICE. Mexican immigrant Jose Guadalupe Ramos Solano died after being found unconscious in California's Adelanto ICE processing center. He is at least the 14th person to die this year while in ICE custody in Riverside County, California. One of Donald Trump's supporters, Sheriff Chad Bianco, who is also now a Republican candidate for governor, has seized ballots from last year's election. The Los Angeles Times reports, according to the new court filings, Sheriff Chad Bianco seized an additional 426 boxes of ballot materials from county elections officials last Tuesday, expanding the cache of election materials the sheriff plans to review in what he has called a fact-finding mission to determine if votes were fraudulently counted. Last month, his department seized more than 650,000 ballots from about 1,000 boxes cast in Riverside County in the November election for Proposition 50, which temporarily redrew the state's congressional districts to favor Democrats. California's Attorney General Rob Bonta, who will join us in a moment, has challenged that investigation in court. In a statement to Cal Matters, he said the sheriff has not identified any particular crime that may have been committed by anyone, a necessary predicate to obtain a criminal search warrant. The Riverside County Sheriff's Office is not equipped nor legally authorized to play the role of elections monitor. By all appearances, this investigation is little more than a fishing expedition meant to sow distrust and undermine public confidence in our elections. And joining us now is California's Attorney General Rob Bonta. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Good to see you.
First, to another death, acknowledged death in ICE custody, the 14th, but it's hard for us to know exactly how many, this one in California.
Always shocking and unacceptable. Unfortunately, not a surprise, given that these detention centers are run by for-profit private entities, and they're cutting corners and not providing adequate health care or oversight or even access to food and drinking water and clothing. We do inspections of the ICE detention centers every year in California, and we see the same thing every time: inadequate, subpar, inhumane conditions that unfortunately lead to adverse health consequences and sometimes tragically deaths.
Do you have jurisdiction over an investigation of a death in federal custody?
We have the opportunity to inspect the conditions inside. Generally, the federal government will be looking at the conditions and the circumstances around the death. We haven't had that opportunity to conduct such a investigation, but because it's a Californian and because it's a death in California, we potentially could. And it would involve federal agents, contracted agents in this case, because it's a for-profit private vendor.
So to this ballot situation, which has an echo of Georgia, Fulton County in it, you have a Republican candidate for governor. He's a sheriff. He seizes the ballots without ever saying that there's any evidence of a crime at all. And who's counting these things now? What's happening to them?
I mean, this is a sheriff who is engaged in a criminal investigation without being able to identify a potential crime or a potential perpetrator of the crime. Basics that you need to conduct a criminal investigation. It appears to be a fishing expedition. He has said with his own words that this is a fact-finding mission, as much to confirm the accuracy of the election as to cast doubt on it, and that is not an appropriate basis to engage in a criminal investigation. So it appears that the counting of the ballots will be by sheriff's deputies, sworn peace officers who should be on the street protecting the safety of Californians, but are instead looking at ballots and trying to figure out what they're looking at because they're not elections administrators who have experience and training in this space.
And this was the vote on redistricting in California that Gavin Newsom advanced after Texas did their redistricting to try to elect Republicans. If the vote total number is different in their count, that could be a perfectly normal outcome of two different counts. I mean, it depends on exactly what the range of difference would be. But also, how can anyone trust their count?
Yeah, you know, there was that's part of it. I mean, this is not sowing trust in our elections. Having a Trump-supporting sheriff who's running for governor has political motive for a political stunt, engaged in this conduct, which is unprecedented. It doesn't engender a lot of trust. But what is happening here is there was a group that seems to prescribe to some conspiracy theories that was suggesting that a preliminary hand count was different than the final count in the Secretary of State's office.
Attorney General Rob Bonta, Attorney General of California, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Great to be with you.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Lawrence.
And coming up, MS Now has new reporting about Donald Trump's potential motives for taking classified documents and violating the Espionage Act, according to Jack Smith's indictment. That's next with Andrew Weissmann. There's new reporting tonight from MS Now's Carol Leonnig on Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation of Donald Trump's possession of classified documents and violations of the Espionage Act. And in that report says, as a January 2023 case memo that MS Now obtained revived the long simmering questions about what motivated Trump to take hundreds of pages of top secret records when he lost his re-election bid. The special counsel's office memo said the FBI found numerous records in its 2022 search at Mar-a-Lago that were connected to Trump's business interests and said it established a financial motive as a reason Trump kept them. But after copious work by Smith's team, the people said prosecutors increasingly believed the most they could prove was that Trump erroneously believed he should be allowed to keep any record he wanted, and some of the documents were simply cool. Joining us now is Andrew Weissmann, former FBI general counsel and an MS Now legal analyst. And Andrew, if this case had gone to trial, how important would motive be?
Well, it's not something that you have to prove in this case or in any criminal case that you need to prove motive. It is something, however, that jurors will have a question about because they'll wonder, why would somebody do this? And so it is something that as a prosecutor, you, of course, look to see whether there is a motive. In this case, it's one where there may have been multiple motives. We don't know the answer to what was either a single motive or multiple motives. I have to say, though, if you are thinking about Donald Trump, the idea that you would consider a financial motive is one that I think it would be irresponsible not to consider. You can obviously think about that in terms of the Mar-a-Lago case, but you could think about that in all of the ways that we have seen reported sort of grift and graft by Donald Trump and his family, not just after he served his first term as president, but actually during his presidency. So it seems like something that you would certainly ask that question and try to dig deep to find the answer to.
I want to go back to what Congressman Garcia is reporting today, and that is the possibility that Jeffrey Epstein's hard drive, computer material like that has never been searched or examined or in the possession of law enforcement. How could that have happened?
So I have to say, I hate to pat myself on the back because this is really investigation 101, but I have been saying this for quite some time. So I don't mean to be saying I'm some sort of, expert genius at this. But the things that have not been done and the people who have not been asked to testify, it's just legion. You would think that the first thing that we would know from the key investigators, whether it's prosecutors or agents, is who have they interviewed and what types of evidence did they obtain. And so when you have somebody with multiple houses and lots of staff and reportedly had a taping or at least a surveillance security system, you would have gotten all of that. You would have interviewed all of those people and you would have documented everything you could find about each and every location. So at the very least, you would be able to say who was there, when did they arrive, when did they leave. For the same reason, for instance, Jack Smith wanted telephone records with respect to members of Congress. I mean, this is 101. And so what you're concerned about, if it did not happen, we don't know the answer, but if it did not happen, you would be concerned about, I would be concerned about obstruction of justice. In other words, was this material destroyed before the FBI and prosecutors could get their hands on it?
Andrew Weissmann, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
Andrew Weissmann gets tonight's last word.